Hello, I'm Ambjörn Naeve, and I'm head of the Knowledge Management Research Group at the KTH at the ECE School presently, and we are working a lot with modeling. And I'm happy to be standing here today with Emeritus Professor David Hestenes, Professor of Physics from Arizona State University, and he's an internationally recognized modeling and modeling instruction leader. He has proved that science modeling, or STEM modeling as we could say, science, technology, engineering and mathematics, can be successfully applied and disseminated in the teachers' education community. And that's some feat. And I'm very happy and interested to learn more about the secrets of making modeling successful.
Well, thank you, Ambjörn, for this golden opportunity to talk about my pet projects with an international audience. Let's go for it.
Right. You have two special wooden horses, as we say in Swedish, which are pet projects that you have cared for a long time. And those are geometric algebra and modeling instruction. In fact, you are recognized as an international leader within both of these fields. Today we will mainly be talking about modeling and modeling instruction, although you have promised to give us a little whiff of geometric algebra. So, what are models? What is modeling, and what is modeling instruction? And why do you think these things are important?
Well, thank you, Ambjörn, for this opportunity for collaboration between the United States and Sweden. The modeling program has been going on for a long time, and it started with research that I did with some students. I had a high school teacher come to me who said that he wanted to do a doctoral dissertation that really made a difference.
And this was, when was this?
This was in 1980.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quite a while ago.
And yes, that's right. And so with him and with another doctoral student, we spent a decade of investigating a new approach to physics education and physics teaching. And that approach was based on my experience as a research physicist, in which I came to the conclusion, and in fact wrote a book on mechanics that was based on the idea that central to the activity of science is making and using models.
That's the new foundations for classical mechanics.
That's
right?
correct.
And that came out in 1986?
Well, it was actually finished right about then. It came out about 5 years later. When it was time to get it through the publisher and all of that. So that actually set the scientific agenda for it. But then there was the issue of its pertinence to teaching.
Yes.
And there we began to consider the issues of reconciling the scientific models that we want to teach with mental models that the students form to make sense of the world.
So mental models are the sort of intuitive things we have in our heads, right?
That's correct.
That we use in our everyday thinking.
That's right.
And we have to somehow combine them with the scientific models in order to make sense of the scientific world, right?
Yes. In order to be able to understand the world of science, you have to connect up your mental models with the scientific models. And so we developed processes for doing that, and that we call modeling instruction.
And that's something you have been running for many years, I know. And could you tell us a bit about how you do it in practice? What makes this work?
Well, it starts out by understanding the process by which students develop their own models. And unfortunately, in conventional didactic approaches to education, with the idea that teaching is transmission of knowledge.
Yes.
We have the constructivist view that students have to construct their own understanding. So the job of the teacher is to set up the conditions under which that can happen. And so we developed a set of techniques. We run the student through all aspects of modeling. So there are two reasons that, you asked about models and modeling.
Yes.
And what's the difference? Now, many people are aware that models are central to scientific research. But a curriculum that is organized around models, that's an advance. But modeling is about the processes of making and using models. And there are many phases of it, such as collecting data, organizing it into a model, then evaluating the effectiveness of your model and explaining the data, and then convincing your colleagues through argument and evidence that you've actually done something and made a connection with the physical world. So we organize the curriculum around these models, and each different model goes, the students run through for each model the modeling cycle that puts them in all aspects of this. And in that way, they learn the procedural knowledge. So modeling is about the procedural knowledge in physics, whereas models are about the structure of the science.
So how long does it take for a student to get into the procedural cycle? How long would that be in a practical situation?
In the programs that we have developed, the modeling cycle has two components. The first component is model development, and that takes about 1 week.
Okay.
And then we have a second cycle, which is model deployment.
Okay.
And model deployment takes another week. And so in the first week, the students are given a situation and they are encouraged to develop a model for themselves with only the barest hints from the instructor. And then after they have constructed their model, evaluated it with empirical evidence, and presented their conclusions to skeptical colleagues, then the teacher presents them with other problems and situations for which the same model will apply.
Yes.
And so they use the model that they already developed. That's called model deployment.
So the models become the connections between different explorations in physics or in science in general.
And the models, eventually, as you get a repertoire of models, then models provide you with a lens for looking at new situations and organizing what's going on.
That's very similar to what we call design patterns in computer science. Repetitive ways of organizing knowledge that is useful for you in order to understand something else or get something else to work.
And that's an interesting thing, because just recently in the United States, it's been emphasized that engineering practices do not get, they get short shrift in the curriculum. And so, however, the modeling, scientific modeling, can be regarded as engineering design worked backwards. Because in science you start with the phenomena and then you build a model to understand it. In engineering, you start with a problem and then you design a model for something that you want to make.
Yes.
So it's the same thing going in the opposite direction, so to speak.
Reverse engineering.
That's right.
Yes. Now, you told me before that you're working with something very interesting. I've always been a fan of whiteboards. I live by my whiteboard, and I think it's the most fantastic modeling tool that was ever invented. And you told me about a technique you call whiteboarding, or that you use collectively with the students to do this, right?
Yeah, that has turned out to be a spectacularly effective means of instruction.
How do you do this? How do you actually practically work with whiteboarding?
Okay, so the whiteboard is about this wide and this high. Very easy to pick up, to hold in front of the audience, to move around.
It even has handles, right?
Sometimes you can put handles on it. So we usually have students work together in groups of 3 or 4.
Okay.
And then when they have reached some conclusions about their investigations, they construct a summary, an outline of their conclusions on this whiteboard,
Okay.
which they are then will present to the class.
Sort of today, the traditional way would be the PowerPoint. So instead of doing a PowerPoint, they do a whiteboard, which they present to the audience.
Yes, and that's very much more flexible.
Yes, of
and
course.
besides,
of course.
while the whiteboard is on the table, it becomes a forum for discussion
Yes.
among the 3 people, among the
Yes.
3 or 4 people. there.
Erasable, especially
That's right.
as opposed to these flip charts, which is a terrible disaster because I always say they flip chart, they promote best practice,
Yeah.
whereas the whiteboard promotes better practice. And better practice is better than best practice because best practice rules out learning.
Yeah.
And that's
another
what you were
important
confirming to me when talking about this. That it's
well, another thing about the whiteboard is everyone has the experience of not really knowing what they think until they tell somebody else what they think.
Yeah.
So this whiteboard gets you a chance to take your ideas about the experiment and then formulate it in an explicit form that can be, for which the meaning can be negotiated.
Exactly. You know, there
So
was
it's
an
an-
Irish philosopher, I forget his name, but he said, how can I know what I think until I hear what I say?
Right.
You know, so that connects with what you're saying, right?
Yes, that's right. Because learning is a feedback loop. And the passive approach to instruction doesn't have the feedback loop.
no.
It's one way.
Exactly. It's knowledge transmission, as it's called.
That's right.
And that does not work. Both you and I know that.
Yeah.
So the question really is how we can amplify the feedback loops and how we can install the motivation and the self-esteem. You know, you as I know that learning starts in these things. If you don't believe in yourself, there will be no learning. If you don't feel the motivation and if you don't feel that, how can you do that? We are feeling in STEM, or we are experiencing in science, technology, engineering, math, education, a dropout rate which is unheard of. People
Yes.
are abandoning ship. You know.
Now, what modeling instruction does is it helps to confirm ownership of the subject matter to the students because it becomes their model after they have put it together.
Yes.
And
This is psychologically tremendously important. I know that also from experience, because then they get engaged, then they have their own prestige in it. It's not the teachers and repeating what others are saying to them. It's coming up with your own version.
that's right. That's right.
And you know the Pippi Longstrump principle, we talked about that, right? That
Yeah.
Pippi Longstocking, as she's called in English, she went to school one day and she got a question from the teacher, and then she said, "Why are you asking me that? You already know the answer." And then she got up and left. So that's what I call a Pippi Longstocking principle. School is a school where questions are asked by the people who do not know the answer.
That's right.
That's a very important didactic principle, I think, and I've experienced this recently with some students we work with, what a difference it makes when they feel in control of the curriculum. So that's what you're saying, right? Modeling will help the students.
That's right. And an important part of this is the skill in the teacher, in managing the discourse within the class, not just telling, but evoking answers from the students.
Facilitating and seeding and all that clever.
Yes. Now, seeding is something that we have developed, or one of our excellent graduate students developed to a fine art, is where the teacher goes around to the various groups in class and notices where they might have some problems, or sometimes where they have strengths. And then the teacher subtly asks a few questions or makes a few comments and so on, so that when it's their turn to present their whiteboard, they are encouraged to bring up these crucial points that the teacher knows really are important. So the teacher does have a role in focusing the instruction so that you end up in a productive place.
Yes. sort of directing and the narrative and encouraging it to go along.
Yeah,
certain-
shaping it
Yes,
something like
yes.
an artist
Yes,
would shape,
exactly.
mold.
I hear you.
Yeah,
This is an improvisational thing, right? Knowing, being sensitive of what is there and being able to utilize it.
that's exactly
Like a
right.
jazz orchestra almost, that you try to pick up on the tunes that are being played.
One of our very excellent teachers said that the key to teaching is knowing your students. That is, you have a profile, you understand, the good teacher understands where the student's understanding is
Yes.
and what are the issues that the student has to
Yes.
still think about.
That's
And then sets up situations where the student gets to practice and
yeah.
consider his own thinking.
That's my experience with modeling also, that as a teacher, I think we have spent too much time telling students where they should go and far too little finding out where they are at. And therefore we cannot make the bridge often that connects these things. Because there's no right and wrong, as you know, in modeling. It's just effective and efficient. What can you do with your model? What can I do with mine? What kind of inferences?
You ask a key question about where we're at. The modeling instruction started with the development of something called the force concept inventory.
Okay.
And the force concept inventory, which has perhaps become the most successful and widely used implement for assessing student understanding in the physical world. It's been translated into 17 languages.
Wow.
And the conclusions that we had initially have been validated over and over again. So now what the force concept inventory does is it enables the teacher to get a picture of where the student's understanding is. Because through everyday life, we develop our concepts of motion and its causes through our experience. But it turns out that it's universal, that the common sense concepts of motion and its causes that people develop from their everyday experience are actually wrong in the sense that they are inconsistent with Newtonian mechanics, as we say it nowadays. And they are inconsistent in almost every detail. The force concept inventory enables the teacher, by giving this inventory to the students and getting the students' opinions and reactions, the teacher is able to assess where the students are with respect to the scientific view.
Isn't one of the, I mean, as I understand it, Newton's major contribution was shifting the connection of force and motion to force and change of motion, acceleration, as we say in physics. You know, before that time, force was regarded to be needed in order to keep something in motion, and that's the way intuitive physics still works, right? We haven't managed to make that transition in everyday life. The way we experience force tends to encourage those mental models of the force as moving something instead of changing the motion of it.
Yep, that's right.
And this
And
connects
so that's
with
one of
these-
the subtle concepts.
connects with the problem of teaching derivatives and calculus and all that thing also in math.
Yes.
You know, which is really should be taught to everybody at a very early age, because there's no strange ideas in that, very natural ideas.
Well, you mentioned the word acceleration.
Yes.
It's interesting to know that Galileo could not express acceleration in an algebraic form like we did. He had to do it with geometric constructions.
That's right. That's right.
And so the invention of calculus, which is a key issue here, and that is the invention of conceptual tools that help us understand the world.
Yes.
And calculus was one of the major developments in that.
Yes, definitely. And as I know, you are the principal architect behind something called geometric algebra, which is a way of developing, and geometric calculus, which is a way of developing this even further. I mean, there's some amazing, I sometimes call it shocking truths hiding here about how mathematics have been designed in a I would say weak way. Could you explain to us what geometric algebra, how that alleviates this? What makes geometric algebra better than the ordinary way of representing geometry, and how could we somehow integrate this in the curriculum?
Well, in the first place, the point of modeling instruction is to organize the instruction in a way that enables students to take advantage of the conceptual tools that are available. And they have to be introduced to these tools. Now, and we just mentioned calculus as a mathematical tool,
Yes.
one of the mathematical tools that has evolved. The history of mathematics can be described as an interplay between geometry on the one hand and algebra on the other hand. And they have mutually influenced each other back and forth until about the beginning of the 19th century when a fusion began. And that fusion began with a man named Hermann Grossman, which has evolved into a unification of mathematics, of algebra and geometry into this geometric algebra, which is a unified language for mathematics. And it is a more powerful system, and it's potentially easier to learn, but it's easier to learn if you haven't learned the wrong way in the first place.
So that makes it possible to short circuit the present way of teaching things. As I know, your book, New Foundations for Classical Mechanics, is based on geometric algebra, right?
Yes, that's right.
So you're looking now into what parts can we bring into the early curriculum? How can we support early students, pupils in getting it right before they get it wrong, right?
Now geometric algebra and calculus has been fully developed for application to advanced projects in physics and science.
Yes.
And so now these more powerful tools are ready to start moving down to the earlier grades. So that's what I consider as the design for the classroom of the future. The modeling instruction is concerned primarily with reforms that have to be done now. But the introduction of these more powerful tools, which will have the advantage of unifying geometry, algebra, trigonometry, and physics all into one coherent program in the high school with simpler methods. And
that sounds almost like Martin Luther King. I have a dream.
Yes.
A day when my little subjects will be judged by their coherence and not by their separate, etc., etc.
That's right. I guess you can't work on education unless you have a dream of a better future.
I would agree totally on
Yeah.
that. That's a driver, right? And as a long-term math teacher and researcher, I'm worried about the same things, that people are dropping out of it because they find it so boring. We are so bad in presenting it, so that we are losing a lot of bright young minds that are absolutely necessary if we're going to maintain our high-tech society. Otherwise, it's going to be hollowed out from the inside.
And that brings up the issue of how can we produce reform of the educational system so that it will work.
Exactly.
Now,
That's
modeling instruction actually is a test case which has proven the principle. And it started where I worked with a couple of graduate students on improving classroom techniques. And then one of these students was a high school teacher, and the results of his dissertation were so amazing to me that I contacted the National Science Foundation in the United States for funding to see if we could get other teachers to be as effective as he was. And sure enough, we found out that we could. And then we had funding for another 15 years in which we spread it around the United States, modeling instruction, and then we had the unanticipated result that after the money flow stopped, because governments tend to just
Yeah.
fund projects until they're going,
I
and then
know.
they stop funding them and they
Yes.
can't go anymore.
Yes.
But the teachers
We-
themselves were so committed to modeling that they created their own community, and it's now the largest program in science education in the country. The teachers have created their own nonprofit organization to continue furthering this. It now has 1,600 members, and
That's
it has
fantastic.
reached well over 6,000 teachers.
Hmm.
And so these are committed. They're so committed that they speak of themselves as modelers.
Mm.
So this then, these unintended consequences of this spontaneous organization of teachers into a community of practice with a common vision. You see, the modeling instruction that was so well researched gave them a common vision. And so they have something now that they have to offer
Yeah.
to the other teachers in the community in the community. So now they are the apostles. They go out and get more teachers and more students, and the program keeps going. But it can't be sustained on teacher power alone. So it's necessary for the scientific community to get behind this,
Yeah,
because as
yeah.
you know, science and technology are moving so rapidly today that to keep up, the teachers have to have continual professional development. So we have designed a program where in the summers they go to summer workshops that are well designed. The teachers interact in a community. They have a common vision of what good teaching is, and they continue to assimilate new stuff. And the program, with its connections to the scientific community, then can keep improving and changing continuously. We need to make this a continuous system.
So you told me before that you need time for this. I mean, the summer is an ideal time, right?
Yeah.
Because you need at least a month or something like that, immersed in an environment like this, right? Where everybody is doing this, where it's natural to, and where you shift roles and you take on different. Is that so?
Yeah, well,
month is-
actually,
how long are your
we
workshops?
have tried workshops of varying lengths, and we have pretty well established that at least for someone that's just starting, 3 weeks is minimum.
Okay.
3 weeks of immersion is minimum.
Okay.
4 weeks, I think, is actually the optimum length of
All
time.
right.
But nowadays, the teachers typically have children.
Yeah.
and they
Social
want to spend-
pressure will make it hard to get
That's-
more than 3 weeks. Right?
That's right. But with sufficient
Yeah.
funding, you can you can fund the teachers to be able to come with their families.
Yeah.
And
And you can
make
go
it family
online.
fair.
I know you have thoughts in this direction.
Yes. Now, of course, online education is the gorilla,
Yeah, the gorilla in the room, right?
the gorilla in the room. Okay.
Yeah.
So just this year, the American Physical Society, which has awarded modeling instruction their highest award for excellence in physics education.
I think, yes, you have received that.
Yeah, but the whole modeling
Yeah, the whole
community,
community
got
does it, yes,
right.
yes.
And so I'm happy to
And
share
that's
the
great,
reward
yeah.
with
No, that's real dissemination success. I have been working in lots of European projects, European Union funded, and this is a dream for them. There's always this: how will you disseminate it? How will you make it self-sustainable? And no project I've been in so far has succeeded with that.
yeah.
So that's really, I congratulate you on this, and that's a great sign, the self-organization of the teachers and
See,
the drive.
This has not only
Self-sustain-
sustained, but is continued without
grow.
funding for 10 years after the funding
Yeah,
stopped.
that's a very, very strong
But
indicator.
it
yeah.
can't go on forever
No,
like
no,
that.
that's right. So that's why we need
because
to.
the teachers have been taking it out of their own hides.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so they need the support not only of the university, from the scientific community, but also from the population at large.
Yes. You see, here at the EC school at KTH, we are scaling up modeling on many dimensions. We're looking into social aspects and helping people to model where they are and where they want to go in a knowledge landscape, and thinking of it from a, as we say in Swedish, folkbildningsperspektiv, folk educational perspective. So how can, for instance, libraries help anyone to get into this and get it into a state where they can bring their whiteboard or their models to a meeting and basically see how they could fit into to collaborate together. The library is a collaboration agency, and we think that these issues are going to be strategic in the future. And this is rapidly happening because education system is breaking down in its traditional forms, and there's confusion, a lot of interesting experiments, but nobody really knows what's going on.
Yes, and so there is a question about, can we get modeling instruction online?
Yeah, exactly.
And so the American Physical Society, partly in consequence of the award that we got, has allocated some money to start a first experiment on online modeling instruction. Okay. And so we shall see how that works. I think that it will go to a combination of online with bringing people together.
Exactly, it's a blended approach.
I think that's going to happen. But what combination? Whether we need to have the people together before we do something online, or after, or what mixture, that remains to be seen. But another thing about this modeling community is that it has spawned and supported the development of local communities of modelers and teachers.
And not only in America,
during the year.
Not only in America, as I understand it. Well, yes, there are things happening abroad as well.
Yes, modeling instruction has been in at least it's known, and the modeling, the full details, I don't think have spread out the United States, except in Singapore. Singapore has been sending teachers to our modeling programs every year for the last 10 years.
Okay.
And as you know,
that's a good uptake.
Yes, Singapore is one of the most aggressive countries at trying to upgrade their science education.
Oh, yeah, and they always turn out top in the PISA and TIMSS and these surveys, right?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, David. I think that we are about to embark on some modeling exercises and experiments here in Sweden, and it would be fantastic to be able to collaborate with you and make use of your experiences and also connect with teachers that have that drive, you know.
Yes.
Because we need to find similar teachers here, and these things are contagious. If you get exposed to people with such drive, you will basically be stimulated to develop.
Well, as you know, the scientific community is not limited to any country.
No, it's not.
It's universal.
Of course.
And the same thing should happen to science education.
Yeah. So maybe geometric algebra could be one of the focus areas to gather around an international table like that, electronically mediated, right?
I think it's one, but I think it's one that
that is a little further in the future,
right?
Because
yes,
I understand why.
Yeah.
What would be the first?
Because we have more serious problems, more elementary problems to deal with.
You know, we have been working with modeling riots and conflicts and getting young people to describe what they are engaged in today, and then looking backwards in history, looking how those patterns reappear in historical conflicts.
Yes.
Have been a great success.
Yes.
And it's
a new approach to history.
Yeah, exactly. So modeling has in a much smaller scale than you have proven to me its value, at least in this context, and there are a lot of people who want to develop that further. So I'm a modeling evangelist. I believe in modeling as a general tool to sharpen your thinking, and it's the process. In Sweden we have this poem by a lady called Karin Boye, and she says it's not the goal but the road itself that is worth the effort. Mm-hmm. And if you translate to modeling, it's not the model itself, it's the process and not the product that's the most important. You are also emphasizing this with separating models from modeling instruction and modeling.
Yeah.
Because modeling becomes like a say in German, a Gesprächspartner, a conversation partner. Mm-hmm. And that helps you to sharpen your own thinking, almost like a Munchausen effect. It can lift you.
And it emphasizes the fact that science is really a community enterprise.
Yes.
People can't
yes.
do science by themselves,
No.
despite the myths about lone
Yeah, the
investigators.
Lone Ranger has always
Yeah.
been attractive, and there was
Yeah.
a time when the Lone Ranger existed. I mean, Herman Gersman, for instance, was a Lone Ranger. He wasn't admitted into the scientific community.
However,
but
he was very
yeah.
well read, and he knew what the
Yes.
scientific community
Exactly,
had done.
of course he was. That's
Yeah.
right. But so it wasn't his fault that he wasn't accepted. But that's another story.
Yeah.
Yes.
That has to do. They call
Yeah.
that the educational establishment.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll leave that out for now, right?
All right.
Yes, we know about that. So I think this has been a wonderful conversation, David. It's been great talking to you. And
Thank you, and I think this is just the start.
It is the start. Let's finish off with a quote
All right.
from a quote from Churchill. Right? This is not the beginning of the end. It's just the end of the beginning.
Great.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.